continue along on our series for dungeon mastering. I think we're on episode 8. The big, not the big one, a big part of every campaign, though. One of the most important things that you will have to set up the pace and expectations for your campaign. Session 0. We're not going to worry about any visuals this time. This is just, if you want to put me on audio podcast mode, that's fine. Not a lot of stuff that needs to go along with this as far as visual aids go. But this is kind of a culmination of everything that we've been talking about up to this point. Prior to this, like I said, episode 1 was just me talking about myself, who I am, what I believe. 2, we looked at where do you find the basic rules. 3, we broke apart turn sequence, actions versus bonus actions. Episode 4, we actually ran a demonstration. I think that was the one where I just ran a VTT and demonstrated combat. 5, oh geez, I'm losing track of it. And then we've talked about magic rules as well, just the basics of magic, talking about what do you need to know, what do you need to look for, emphasizing that there's no way on God's green earth or anyone that you need to worry about memorizing every spell in the game. Doesn't happen. And then episode 6, we took episode 6 and 7, we kind of took apart the Dungeon Master's Guide, looked at some major sections that you will need that will be very helpful for you as you move forward in Dungeon Mastering. Whether it's day 1 or day 50, there's useful information within the Dungeon Master's Guide. Kind of talked about the basic ideas of an adventure in episode 6. And episode 7, we kind of started drawing it all together, making sure that we covered the information one last time that you needed to run your session. That leads us to this episode, and this is also going to be session 0. Excuse me. This is where you're going to take all of that stuff that you've been working on and everything that you're learning and set it in front of your players and establish the expectations, rules, theme, and everything else of your adventure or campaign going forward. Keep in mind, for the purpose of the discussion, adventure campaign will be an interchangeable term. A campaign consists of adventures. An adventure is not a campaign, but can become a campaign. A campaign is just a bunch of adventures put together into a longer story. That's just the kind of thing to understand there. So what do you got to do? About to do session 0. You're going to sit down in front of with your play group and talk it all out. The first things that we've established is you are comfortable and familiar with actions, bonus actions, reaction, turn sequence, and running the basics of combat. You don't have them all memorized. The only thing that's going to help is repetition. But you are familiar with the terms. You are you at least know where to look to find any of the documentation that you need to support this. You're familiar with the basic rules sections. You know how spells kind of work, at least the keywording system as far as casting time, range, duration. You've even got an idea of the adventure you want to run. So it's time to sit down with your people. Time to sit down with your play group and run your session 0. The thing that you as a dungeon master have, in my opinion, session 0 is twofold. Number 1, you are establishing the rules, regulations, theme, and actual adventure that you're going to run. Number 2, you're establishing respect and allowing your players to interact. More importantly, prompting them to interact with each other and build a good rapport and start off with a good, respectful foundation. Typically in a session 0, I'll talk for a bunch of it for the first 30% of it, and then I try to sit out the remainder of it and just kind of answer questions as they pop up, because I want the players to interact with each other, to ask questions, to become engaged. If all I do is talk to them for the full hour or however long your session 0 is going to take and don't give them input, feedback, or anything, that's all going to pop up in game sessions as you go. So you're trying to prompt conversations about the game and present your rules. So let's start with the first part, your part, the dungeon master. You need to come in, you need to be willing and able to say, these are the rules that we're using. For all intent and purposes, day 1, you will likely be using the basic rules, and you're going to be saying rule is written. So, you're going to form your party. We're using basic rules, the rules as presented in Player's Handbook, the basic rule as written, okay? If you're doing any homebrews, however, then this is where you're going to put that. Maybe you're putting in the change. However, I like to use critical fails and critical successes. So anytime there's a 1 rolled, no matter what, it's going to be an automatic fail. Anytime there's a 20 rolled, no matter what, it's going to be an automatic success. That would be a homebrew rule that you put out there in front of your party at this time. Anything that is going to be a deviation from the basic rules, from the accepted 5th edition or whatever edition you're playing, from the standardized rule as written, this is where you bring that up. Any of the customization things, this is where you bring this up. As a dungeon master, this is this is that moment you're telling them, this is going to be a hardcore campaign. We're going to probably kill a couple characters, for example. This is also talking about theme. If there's any adjustments, we're playing on a low magic environment, or what am I trying to think? I'm paused. Whatever adjustments you're making to the rules. Maybe you're going to say that, no, that's getting tough. There's a million and one slight adjustments that you can make to the rules of the game, and this is where you're going to discuss those with the players. Your players may bring things to the table that they want to do. Are you allowing multi-classing in your campaign? Yes or no? That's decided here. Do your players get to play multiple characters? Yes or no? That's decided here. These are all the things that you want to talk about in your session 0. The fundamental things that will be the same in every session of your game. The rules that you're going to follow. The procedures that you're going to follow. The exceptions to the rules that you're going to follow. I know that's a lot of stuff to talk about. Hopefully by this time you are familiar and aware of the rules. Not memorizing, but at least familiar with them and confident in being able to look them up as needed, if not administer them on the spot. That's the first part of what you're talking about in your session 0. Rules, 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 rules. Sounds dumb, but remember, we are doing Dungeons & Dragons is a collaborative story, a game based on a set of accepted rules that we're using to build the collaborated story. Everyone needs to know the rules. Let me rephrase that. Everyone needs to know the rules that you're going to use. You shouldn't be sneaking stuff in on your party. Anything that they might need to know differently about a standardized game. This is the rules section. That's what you're talking about in your session 0. Critical fails versus critical hits or critical successes. Are you using optional rules for flanking? Are you going to be a little bit loose and free with dual wielding? Things like that. Anything that is going to be a custom change from your standard rules, or even if it's just standard rules, that's where you're emphasizing that in your session 0. So number 2 thing that you're presenting to your group as a dungeon master is going to be the adventure. Now there's a little bit of a differentiation of thought in here. Some play groups are perfectly fine with the DM not saying anything about what we're playing. Others kind of want to know. So this is going to be that point in the session 0 that you're discussing this with your party. You're telling them, we're playing Curse of Strahd. We're going to start at level 1. We're going to do the Death House, and we're going to end the campaign with the Death of Strahd. Or you can say, I think we're going to start with this. I'm not sure where we're going to end. Whatever your plan is, this is where you voice it to your players. A lot of, there are some DMs that, and honestly, a lot of us older guys that are like, the players shouldn't know what they're about to play because they'll meta it. That is a valid point. That is a valid line of thinking. But at the same time, if your players are into the idea of it, they're going to engage in it more. So that's one of those early on. I would suggest that you're telling your players the adventure that you're planning, the campaign book that you're going to run. We're doing Lost Mines. This is my first time out. I want to learn how to play. I want to learn how to DM. So we're going to go with the basic adventure. Cool. I've made up this really cool homebrew and blah, 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 blah. Cool. Now, so the first step is rules, reinforcement of the rules that you're going to use, any changes to the rules that you plan on administering during this campaign. This is where you're presenting. The second part of the DM packet of the session 0 is the adventure itself. What are you planning on doing? What does your party need to know or not know about the setting? If you're doing an absolute 100% from the ground up homebrew, this is where you're going to expect a lot of questions from your characters. This is where you need to lay out the baseline for the world. This is how my world is different than Forgotten Realms. This is how my homebrew world is different than Kryn. That's part of session 0. The second setting the adventure up, setting the stage, if you will, for what you guys are about to do. So you've covered the rules. You're starting to touch on that. So this the second section can be up to you, honestly. How much or how little you share with your party is genuinely a DM's decision. I think it's fair, and I honestly think it's prudent to at least share with your party what they're about to get into. We're going to play Storm King's Thunder. It's going to take a while. Um, this is where you're talking about scheduling as well. Are you playing weekly? Are you playing every other week? 2 hour sessions, 7 hour sessions, whatever. That'll come in. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. Second thing, first thing is rules. Second thing is actual adventure that we're going to run. Um, that's very, very, very much in your court as an individual dungeon master. There's not necessarily a right or wrong with that, but this is the point in the conversation where you'll share that and discuss that with your party. Um, be prepared for a little bit of pushback. If you haven't been discussing it with your party before, I'm going to run out of the abyss and we're going to start naked and afraid. Ah, man, that doesn't sound very fun. This is where you have that discussion with your players. You might have to alter a little bit to engage them, or if you completely surprise them from the beginning, that's up to you. Now, I would recommend why I recommend talking to your players about your planned campaign is one simple fact. It's going to impact their characters, the characters that they bring. It's going to impact the characters that they use for the campaign. Some people will we're going into the Underdark. Well, I'm going to make sure my guy's got dark vision on my character. Things like that are things that you can help prompt your party. Again, there are the arguments that can lead to meta play, and it is a valid argument. Day 1, don't worry about any of that. That's day 5, day 10, day 20 type of a stuff that you need to worry about. Day 1, don't worry about the meta aspect. You're just trying to make sure that you're checking off the boxes so you can get into play and start getting your repetitions in, okay? Talk about rules, talk about what we're running. Next thing is logistics. Where are you playing? You playing online? Are you playing face-to-face? This is where scheduling comes in. How often are we going to play? How long is our session going to be? Who's bringing food if you're playing face-to-face? If you're playing online, make sure that this is the discussion where you make sure that everyone is aware of the tools that they're going to need. Discord, Facebook groups, Microsoft Teams. It doesn't matter. This is up to you. Each group's going to find the software, or if you're playing face to face, this is where you're establishing that. Whose house are we at? Are we always at the DM's house? We're going to rotate houses. Are we doing food? Are we doing drinks? All that kind of stuff. This is where you're establishing it. The third part is your logistics. Let's talk to the VTT people. Make sure that your group has the hardware to run your VTT. Nothing worse than having one player that has to drop out because you're running 60 meg files on Foundry and they can't connect to it. Make sure that everyone has their hardware squared away. Do you have to have a PC to use that software, or are you able just to use Discord on your phone and use D&D Beyond on your tablet? This is the logistics part of it, and that a lot of that you'd kind of think it goes without saying, but you'd be very surprised how many times that your starts of your campaigns are mucked up when you're playing virtually because of software issues. I don't have Roll20. Well, make sure you get it installed. Let's talk about, this is where you are making sure that everyone is on the same page logistically. We're playing face to face. Does everyone, bring in your own dice? We're printing our player character sheets. You playing digitally, hybrid, whatever. This is the point of the session 0 where that's discussed. Cannot emphasize enough that you got to be on the same page. Well, let's just play whenever we can get together. You're never going to play. Establish a schedule. Establish when you're starting, when you're finishing. Make sure that you set up responsibilities. Dungeon Masters, as part of the logistics thing, maybe you'll tap into your players to help with communication. Maybe one of the players will handle help handle scheduling communications in the Discord chat. Whatever you want to do, whatever you need to do. Who's bringing miniatures if you're playing face-to-face? Are you using miniatures? Are you using Legos? Are you using paper markers? Virtual tabletop? Any of the stuff. All the stuff that comes with D&D. This is where you're discussing it. Either A, you're presenting, for example, myself, welcome to my table. We're going to do Desert of Desolation. Okay. This is start your characters at level 3. No multi-class builds allowed. Your character backstory doesn't matter because you're being sucked in from wherever your character was into this new place for the purposes of this adventure. Okay. So I've established, the theme and the idea of the adventure. We are playing virtually. Now we're getting into logistics here. So I need to make sure that everyone has enough space to see a map on your screen. I would recommend making sure you have a tablet at the very least, if not a laptop. You need to be able to have Discord open. You need to have D&D Beyond open, and you need to be able to use a Discord shared screen to see the map. Outside of that, logistics, make sure you got the bandwidth to handle it, and we're good to go. So that was just an example of my setup. Players that come to my table, they need to have internet access, they need to be able to see Discord shared screen, and need to have D&D Beyond. Outside of that, that's all they need to have. If you're running on Foundry, Owlbear, Rodeo 2.0, Roll20, whatever, this is where you, as a dungeon master, make sure that your players have access to the software, know how to run the software, yes, and all that stuff. So this is the point where you will kind of become a little bit of a tech advisor. And this is a little bit editorial here. Don't commit to using software systems or other systems for part of your game that you cannot run. Because if you can't run it, you can't teach your players to handle it. In addition, this is speaking strictly to the VTT crowd. If you're running a VTT, you need to be ready to teach your players an additional layer to the game. In addition to teaching them just Dungeons and Dragons, you're also going to teach them how to work software. Most of the time, it's not a big deal. Most of them are plug and play, but there can be some challenges and difficulties. During your session 0 and the logistics phase of it, that's what you're focused on. How are we playing the game with each other? Face-to-face, dry erase markers, tokens and Legos and miniatures, virtual tabletop, theater of mind. We don't need a map. We're just discussing it. I'm going to describe the scene to you, and you will respond to me. Make sure that you're paying attention so we don't have to spend too much time repeating things back and forth. Theater of mind is a little bit more of a challenge. We'll probably actually do a complete breakdown on how to run theater of the mind combats and stuff on a different session. Different episode, excuse me. So, your session 0. We've covered the first 3 sections. The last section is to me, as important as the rest of it. This is where your group is hanging out. This is where you're prompting questions. Ask them to ask you questions. Put some prompts out there. This is where we want to encourage the players to interact with each other a little bit. If you're playing friends and family, face-to-face, all of that kind of stuff, this may not be as much of a necessity. Your players already have a level of familiarity between each other. They already have a little bit of a rapport and some mutual respect. If you're coming into a brand new table with a brand new situation, and you've got 4 strangers that have never played together but have agreed to play with you, it happens a lot more often than you'll think. Just editorial comment there. This is the primary step to starting the foundation of their communication and relationship with each other. This is going to be an indicator if you're going to see any potential personality problems or conflicts arising in your party. So this is in my opinion, how I run session 0s. This is the tricky part. This is the challenging part. This is where you're trying to lead your players into conversing with each other while not feeling like you're forcing them to do it. If you follow what I'm saying, you want to use some prompts, some silly questions or whatever to prompt it up. Obviously, most of the time you should be getting feedback from your party. You tell them that this is going to happen. Someone in the group is going to ask, well, what about that? We want to play on Wednesdays. Oh, Wednesdays suck for me. All of that kind of stuff. A lot of the basic conversation points of the first 3 sections, the rules section, the actual adventure section, and the logistics section, should be prompting questions from your players. So the ball should be rolling already. They should be interacting with you and interacting with each other, okay? One really good thing, and it bears without question, this is when the last sections where you're talking about your players, this is where you're also going to talk about their characters, their backstories, all of that kind of stuff. You can have a lot of fun here. The players, if you have a good group with a good natural rapport, you're going to see them kind of building off of each other at this point. Oh, you're going to run a fighter? Cool. Well, I'll make sure to run with the cleric instead of that. Oh, okay. Well, I can do this and I can do that. You can see that. And you can also see some of the negatives. Why would you do that? That's a dumb build. You should do this. You can already instantly tell that you're going to have one person who's going to try to play the other player's characters. So this is a moment of insight for you to listen to the players talk to each other. Listen to how they interact with each other and what they interact with each other over. They're telling jokes, talking about anime and talking about comics and cartoons and all that, and having a good time. They have a good natural flow and a natural rapport. Sliding into D&D isn't going to be much of a difference. You got two or three of these of the individuals that end up getting into an argument over character creation. You have the potential for a conflict, an interpersonal conflict to start there. Like I said, this is not the tried and true guaranteed, oh, these guys hate each other. But this is definitely a preview for you to take note of to see where there might be the potential for conflict, where there might be the potential for cooperation. Talking in this section is less important. In the fourth section, listening, active listening is the most important thing that you're going to need to do. Don't try to head off the conflicting questions. Don't act like that. Don't be that way. Don't do that. Participate in it. Well, that's interesting. I wonder, if you did this build instead of that build, why do you think this build is worse than that build? It's a fine line to straddle, but a lot of times you can lead the conversation, number one, to a little bit less of a hostile place to see if there is going to be a personality challenge there. Number two, to exert your will as a dungeon master that you're going to mediate these kind of things. So I know it sounds kind of wonky. I know it sounds a little bit silly, but you want your players to have some fun, to bicker, even, I don't want to say bicker, but you want to be able to see differences in personalities and differences in play styles in your session zero. A lot easier to become aware of and address them as you go if you're aware of them now, rather than becoming aware of them 9 sessions in and one of your players is about to leave. Okay, and that's going to happen. That's part and parcel of D&D. Because we're people. We're not using playing pieces. This isn't this is a game involving people. Every single person at the table that's involved in the moving parts of the game is an individual person. They're going to have their own thoughts, feelings, emotions, opinions, and all of that, and that's part of the balancing act that you get to do as a dungeon master. So prompt conversations. This is might be where you break in, especially if you if you have a group of brand new players to your table, digging into some icebreakers might kind of work type of a here. Maybe ask things that are D&D related but aren't directly interacting with this campaign. Talk about some fancy players. So if Morton Kanan was to roll up onto you guys in the end, how would you treat him? Just some simple D&D fun what-if icebreakers. Let your party see how each other is, in addition to letting you see how they would act, interact, and react with each other, as well as with you as a dungeon master. Play some fun little word games with them. This is kind of one of those things that, I use this example a lot, but I think it's one of the best team building things, and it's a creative thing. You guys are on a desert island, and this example will take a little bit of work. Your ship crashes with 20 items on them, but you can only carry 10 of them. What would be the items that you guys take away from the wreck to survive with? And watch the parties play with each other. See if there's anyone that stands, no, we absolutely have to take the cannon because blah, blah, blah. And you're an idiot if you don't take the cannon. Strong personality who's going to try to dominate the conversation. I don't care. What do we think? Those kind of things. Those word games, those icebreakers, those problem-solving things are going to give you an opportunity to watch them work together, and they're going to give you personal feedback. If you can frame it in Dungeons and Dragons terms, so much the better, because you're also learning about how they react with that. If it's a relatively informed group, ask them. In this group, if Black Razor was to be looted, who would carry it? Type of a thing. Check their knowledge on things. Little things like that. Ambiguous stuff. You find a wagon is broken with the farmer. The farmer's wagon is broken. The wheel is popped off, and he asks you to return to town to get the wheel, so you can make sure that the orphanage up the road gets their food. But you guys have already been assigned a job by this guy and to go do this. What do you do? It's little situations like that. Play word games with them. Give them moral quandaries. Give them quick little things to interact with each other and interact with you. You can spend your last 2 hours of session zero, using icebreakers. And if you're curious, you can honestly Google up icebreakers, group icebreaker questions for work. Most of these are work related, but honestly, it's a fun thing to do. Um, what's the hardest? Do you? That's an icebreaker. What's your preferred beverage in the morning? Something simple like that. I don't drink. I drink water and only water. I'm a coffee drinker type of thing. Little, pull up a list of icebreaker questions. Have it on hand for your party when you're sitting there in your session zero. Throw these prompts out. They can be D&D related. They can be real life related. And sometimes mixing the two up is a good thing. You can make sure that your party, what's the most important part for you when we're playing? Is it the fact that we're beating a big bad guy, or is it more important for you to get the fat loot, or was it just the hanging out and accomplishing something with your friends that was the best thing? Little icebreakers like that. What's the best book you've ever read? What's your favorite TV show to quote from? All these, there's hundreds and hundreds of icebreaker questions. I mean, you can, like I said, straight up do the work on the front side DMs, Google up a list of icebreakers, and just throw them out there. Let your party have some fun with it. What would your superpower be and why? Let each person have a turn. When you're doing that, like I said, I want to emphasize this is going to show you as much about your players' personalities as they react with each other as anything else. In addition to giving you some laughs, letting them prompt, you're going to see if there's that one person at the table that's always going to have a comment on someone else's stuff, which means that they're always going to have a comment on someone else's decisions in the game, things like that. That's the person that you keep an eye on. That might be the potential for a problem player later. You're discovering that now through their reaction to icebreaker questions. Has nothing to do with Dungeons and Dragons. Now we're examining personalities, and that's what you want to do in the latter part of your session zero. You've established your rules. Everyone's in agreement. We're using 5e rules. Basic rule is written wherever possible. If we have a dispute on our rules, we're going to play through in our game. We'll look up the rule later, and I'll put a post on the actual ruling. We're talking about adventures. We're going to do Lost Mines of Phandalin, but I'm going to add some extra content on it so we can play it through level 10. That way, if you know the adventure, it's not a big deal because I've got some extra homebrew stuff on there. And, now we talked about logistics. We're going to do this online. We're playing every Friday night from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. Make sure that your butt's in seat by 6:45. We're rolling dice at 7:15. If you're late, you're late. And now we're on to the social part, the last part, the big part, the conversations. The first 3 sections are you talking and your party acknowledging. This last section is your party interaction. How do they work with each other? How are they going to answer your questions? Are you going to be able to predict any possible conflicts, which the sooner you can see them, the sooner you can plan for resolutions. Or you might see that one person that's just every single time someone said something, that's dumb, that's stupid, that's dumb. Why would you do that? Kick them out of your table now. You've learned at this point that this one individual is just going to be a chagrin to everyone else in the group. Session zero, you've isolated a problem before it became a problem, and now you have the opportunity and decision to keep it from becoming a problem. All right, dude, you know what? During our session zero, you had nothing but negative input on everybody. You made a couple people feel bad. You argued with me about rules, and we're not even playing. This isn't going to work out. There's thousands of DMs. They run thousands of styles out there. You'll probably have a better chance being happier at a different table. Thanks. Sorry it didn't work out. Good luck to you. Boom. Done. You've saved yourself months of stress. You saved yourself months of problem solving. And likely you've saved yourself a couple people leaving the table because of that strong personality. So that's why I really want to put an emphasis when you get into your session zero, lay out your rules up front, lay out your campaign adventure idea out front, get your logistics done up front. It shouldn't take you more than 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, including questions and answers to say what you need to say. Leave the last hour and a half or 2 hours to interact with your people, with your players. Remember, I said that in the first ever episode of this series. I believe investing in your players as people will make your game stronger as players. If there's a level of mutual respect, if there's a level of mutual like, it's important for everyone to like each other at the table as well. They know no one's going to be best friends day one, but there needs to at least be some amicable feelings. There needs to be some positive energy coming from the group. That's what we're trying to determine and establish with the last section of your session zero, with the chat section. If you were to die, when you die, regardless if they're dead or alive, which band, which artist would you have playing at your funeral? Shit, simple. What's your favorite TV show? Weird questions. What's your favorite, tell me a story about a scar you have. Oh, I don't want to do that. Okay, so then you find out, and ask weird ones. Ask awkward ones. Don't get personal, okay? This is another thing. Oh, shit. I need to rewind this back to part one, and I am so sorry. I should have said this to begin with as part one. During your rules thing, this is where you need to make sure that you are establishing do's and don'ts, rights and wrongs, limits. Very, very important. Humor limits. What is okay to joke about? What's off the table? Context limits. Excuse the terminology, but is sexual assault and rape going to be part of your campaign? If you're playing an evil campaign, that's might be part of it. Is that a trigger to anyone at your table? Then you need to ignore that. Is it okay for children to get hurt? You need to talk about that kind of stuff. Language. It might be simple. I don't like a lot of cussing. This is an important. Hell, we'll call this its own section. I don't even want to lump this into section 1, 2, or 3. Section 4 on its own is chatting. So this might be your pretext to that. At any point in your session zero, this has to be focused on. And I apologize. This is one of the most important parts of your session zero. What are your hard limits? What are your soft limits as players? What are you okay with? What are you not okay with? Descriptions of gore. And I know we're getting graphic here. Bodily fluids. If you're walking through a sewer, are you okay with me describing at great lengths all of that kind of stuff? Ooh, no, that's gross. You need to know this stuff in advance. You don't want to chase someone away from the table because you chose to go down a path that is a trigger for them, or that emotionally touches them, or they just don't want to do. That's just I'm playing D&D to have fun. Mutilating a city does not sound fun to me. I don't want to do that. That's a valid limit, guys. That's a valid statement from a player to make. Those are the things that you need to be willing, even if you got to get a little bit ooky, a little bit gross, a little bit into the grease and the dirt and the yuck and the weeds, to give your players examples of things that may or may not be bad, negative, triggering behavior. That's what you want to. That's a major thing that you want to establish in your session zero as well. This is going to play in with what we're talking about in the general chat also. Because if you start putting this stuff out, you'll have that one guy says, I'm not going to say you're always, but you'll have, oh, I don't want to do that. Why not? That's part of the game. Well, yeah, but it's just kind of, oh, you're going to be a sissy. You already got a problem. These are the kind of things, these are the kind of questions that are going to show you where you have potential conflict points between your players as well. One player might be no limits whatsoever. Everything's on the table. I quote South Park to my children. I don't think anything is offensive. And then you might have someone on the other extreme that's here to be the hero, to rescue the damsel in distress, and to be the noble chivalrous knight. These two are going to have a hard time playing at the same table together. Unless there are some declarations established early, unless there's limits established early and voiced out. So that's a big part of session zero. And that can be, that's part of the interaction phase as well. You're setting your limits. You're setting the do's and the don'ts. If you want to use a flashcard system where, if you're playing in real life, obviously someone's going to look at, you can just see the change on their face if you're going a little bit too far. Virtually, it might be as simple as someone sending you a message, hey, yellow, you might be going too far as a dungeon master, or, whatever terminology you want to use. There's a bunch of different methodologies that have been put in place to ensure safety at your table. I'd recommend you take a look at a couple of them. While we're chatting, let's look up table safety, D&D table safety rules. The X card is something you just have a nice index card with a black X on it. They just in a live game, they just touch the card. In a virtual game, it could be just someone sends you the message that says an X on it. You can change the scene, or you can skip, you can change what happened. There's a lot of different D&D safety tools. Sly Flourish has a pretty good site um, as far as safety tools go. They are Sly Flourish is the publisher for the Lazy DM's Guide, the Return to Lazy Dungeon Master, all that kind of stuff. It's a pretty good third-party publisher. Um, it always makes me laugh because it's like, oh, I use the Lazy DM's Companion. Well, so you did a lot more reading than most DMs. Good for you. There's no such thing as a lazy DM. All that means is, when did you do your prep? Did you do it 5 minutes before you started, or did you read 700 pages of text a year ago and it's all in your brain? Every dungeon master is preparing all the time. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Even you guys at home that say, oh, I just make it up as I go along. That's cool, because you did a bunch of research beforehand and it's all stored in your brain and you're able to make it up as you go along. There's still prep involved. So I digress there. Safety tools. What are the lines? First and foremost, this is part of your planning as a dungeon master. When you sit down in front of them, what is part of your campaign? What are the things you're planning on doing? Are there any potentially disturbing subjects that you're going to touch on this? Sexual assault, extreme violence, mutilation, body horror, things like that. That's where you need to be upfront with them. You don't need to try to sneak this shit in for shock value or any of that, because if they're not happy with it, it's going to cause more issues. Especially if they've already the players have told you up front, I don't like that. Well, I'm going to do it anyway. That's disrespectful. Make sure you're upfront. You're DM. You're creating an entire world. You shouldn't be limited by a gore factor for your creation. If your party gets ooked out easily, cut the gore out. Adjust your adventure. It's okay. Lines and veils, topics that should never come up at all. Veils, topics that should be handled off-screen or abstract. Basically, the idea that the fade to black, your horny bard, the stereotypical horny bards hooking up with the chambermaid of the baron so they could break in. You don't need to role play that. You can just fade it to black. All right, your bard and the chambermaid head off. Meanwhile, the rest of you guys in the tavern, castle, whatever, XYZ. There should definitely be some fade to blacks, and that's what you're discussing with your party there. What things can we discuss? What things do you guys want faded to black? That is a player decision. That is not a DM decision. You're not here to verbally describe George R.R. Martin's rape scenes from the fucking his book series, Songs of Fire and Ice. You don't need a 26-page dissertation on violence. That's, if your group doesn't want to hear it, you're not giving it to them. That's part and parcel for being a DM. If it's that important to you to get into that depth on your stuff, find the right group for you. Don't expect the group to adapt to you. Your job is to adapt your content to the group you agreed to host. First and foremost, get that up in line, okay? Make sure that there's a pause mechanism given there. If something gets a little bit tight, can we just pause for a second, blah, 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 take a break out of character, talk about it in players. I'm not comfortable with this. Let's go ahead, come up with some sort of blanket term, timeout. Whatever you need to use as your group to make sure that, we kind of talked about that in the speech part of the section. You have in-character speech, you have in-player speech, then you have in-character speech, out-of-character speech, and in-player speech. 3 different tiers. Make sure that you have something in here that's going to cause an immediate interrupt to shift you out of character speech to player speech if necessary. We're playing a horror, well, not a horror game. We're playing a fantasy game. We're playing a game about dragons and dungeons and demons and monsters and angels and giants and half spider, half people and underwater swimming monsters that can crush your planets. We're talking about, epic disasters that can flatten a city, killing everyone of, hell, Elturel, a city of 50,000 people, when men, women, and children get sucked into hell with all of their souls being damned. We get into some adult content as part of Dungeons & Dragons adventures. You need to make sure that you are being upfront with your party, and that's what kind of leans back to sharing your adventure with your group. This gives you the opportunity to put it all out there in front of them. You're not describing every step of the adventure. You're describing what can take place. We're going to use Descent into Avernus. Obviously, we're dealing with devils, demons, betrayal, body horror, mutilations, murders, the loss of souls, morality decisions, uh, alien-esque, a lot of different things. Cannibalism is part of it. Mental assault, ritual sacrifices, things like that are part, and obviously the entire city of El Toro is about child endangerment. These are that one adventure, playing it naturally, not adding anything to it, had a lot of negative factors. Most of those are okay for most people. Some of them might be triggers for players. You need to be aware of those. You need to be upfront with those and prepare accordingly. Okay? They're not a big deal. The safety tools that come through, just you're establishing up front. Number one, that's you're taking measures to show respect to your group, that you respect them as players, you respect their time as people, and you want to ensure that we are here to have a fun time. So you're giving yourself credibility when you start out with this. A lot of people are like, nah, just we'll handle it as it pops up. You're breaking the game flow. You're not being consistent, and your players are going to be operating loose and fast, finding your limits and pushing those limits to see if they're truly limits, rather than acknowledging the limits that were put on in front at the start of the game and playing within those bounds. If you don't set boundaries, your players are going to look for boundaries, and if you're not consistent with the boundaries, it gets worse and worse. The pause for a minute concept is a really good type of a thing. Hey, can we pause a minute? You start going into the evil, the temple of doom, and the sacrifice has been laid across the altar as the high priest pulls a dagger out and begins cutting from the navel to the top of the chest. You can hear the rib cage cracking as they, and at one point, any point, because I'm out of character, I can be very, very, very vivid and descriptive in my text. Someone can say, "Oh, okay, that's gross. Can we just pause for a minute and just, yeah, okay, no big deal." That doesn't ruin the campaign for me, because I couldn't finish describing someone's mutilation and their ribcage being ripped apart while the heart is held astray in front of everybody. That doesn't change anything for me. If it makes it uncomfortable for my players, I need to be able to instantly edit that out. That's the pause for a minute concept. Whether it be an X card where we're touching on the table, pause for a minute, time out, hold on, however you want to handle that. That has to be on front and aware. I mean, you can go as far as, let me see if I can find one, and I'll actually show it up. Okay. There's a campaign safety checklist, campaign safety and consent checklist that's out there in the public domain. And honestly, let me pop over to it real quick. Sure, why not? We'll zoom in a little bit, just so you can see in words what I'm talking about. I'm going to read off to you, so if you're in podcast mode, don't worry, you're not missing anything. Baseline assumptions of the game. This is just reinforcing what we've been talking about a little bit more here. You can, by the way, you can copy this over to your own hard drive and have a copy of it ready to go, modify it for your players. Basic safety and consent. Horror, mental, physical health, harm to children, mind control, sexual content, what's not part of my game, cultural conflicts or prejudice may exist, racial essentialism is not part of play, comes down to local culture as far as Forgotten Realms. Racism is something that we talk about. Drinking and poverty, anyone can call for a pause, rewind, or skip ahead on uncomfortable play material. And you're presenting them with a consent list at session 0. Whether you want to actually print something out or have that discussion, it has to happen as part of your session 0. Nice and simple form. Use a stoplight colored system, green, yellow, and red. So, as you go through things, it gives you a nice list. The highest rating equivalent that you are comfortable with the game, approximating your game to a TV or movie show. Is it G? Is it NC-17? Is it anywhere in between? Is it something else entirely? You have the obligation to be upfront with your players on the content of game that you're running. Not even the adventure. How are you planning on running it? It's going to be full of salty language and lots of lewd comments. This is going to be rated R, bordering on NC-17. Ooh, I don't want to play that. Okay, so you have the choice of either saying thank you, bye, or adjusting down. Up to you. Have a whole big thing here: bugs, blood, demons, eyeballs, gore, harm to animals, harm to children, rats and spiders, horror themes, and your party can choose on each of these: green, yellow, or red. I don't care about any of these. It's not a big deal. I'm going to go green. you know what? I got an issue with eyeballs. I'm okay with everything, but if you're going to talk about an eyeball flying out someone's socket and you're dangling around by the nerve end, that's going to gross me out. So I'm going to click on red, and we're not going to use that. That's my personal trigger as a player. Additional items to note: if there's something your players really don't want to see, you can put it there. Relationships, and as we go through this list, it's not all gross and ooky and negatives. Um, Romance. Some people are genuinely uncomfortable with romance in an RPG, and that's fine. That's okay. They need to be upfront with that. If there is the chance for romance, if you're planning to allow romance in your campaign as a dungeon master, you need to make sure that you're being upfront to your players about this. Romance with the fade to black, or romance explicitly described, romance between PCs and NPCs, romances between players. This is all stuff that needs to be defined as well up front. I mean, I'm like I said, I dungeon master a lot, but I play in one campaign. My wife's another character. We're always flirting with each other, but I don't think we'll go too far with it, because the idea of us old married couple people that are playing and then being a married couple in game might be ooky to some of the younger people. It's okay. It's something that was established early. Are you allowing romance between your players? Yes, no, that's up to you. From a strategic point of view, if you have a hookup, you have the potential for inevitable breakups. A lot of DMs say no to romance between players from the simple fact that it can add a dimension of drama to your campaign that doesn't need to be there. It's up to you. Sex with the fade to black, explicitly described sex between NPCs and PCs, same thing. The nice, simple checklist that tries its best to cover all the bases, even if they may not be present in your campaign. But this is a nice little handout that your players may or may not appreciate. If you do nothing else, at least take a look at some campaign safety tools and tips, so you can be informed as a dungeon master when you present this information to your players. So many things that I've seen cause disruptions to the campaigns, or forcing a player from a campaign, can be addressed in your session 0 if you're aware of it. A lot of things might take time to fester, but that doesn't change the fact that you are aware of it. Social and cultural issues. This is something I see happen a lot. Homophobia, racism, real world religion, sexism, transphobia, slavery. Homophobia, sexism. Homophobia, transphobia aren't really ever issues, at least in the campaigns I've seen. Racism can be a constant thing, because the game is based on, fantasy races. Are you a old school all orcs are evil, all goblins are evil, all drow are evil? Which means that some people are going to call you racist. Sexism, is it a patriarchy or a matriarchy? Is every leader in your world a king? Or are there any queens in the world? Do women have an equal state in every affair as men do? If they don't, then your campaign might be sexist. Little bitty isms that we don't quite think about, but are actually present and a concern for us to address now as dungeon masters. Back in the day, that was that was part of the world. The Dark Elves all lived underground. They were all evil, and we lived to fight them. Nowadays, it's not so much that. So make sure you're establishing the social and cultural issues of your campaign early and informing your players of it. We're playing a traditional fantasy role-play world. It's still heavily segregated by race and class. If your players don't want to be part of that, they can tell you right up. And either A, you can say find another table, or B, you can adjust your content. But make sure you're being upfront with that. It is perfectly viable to run those worlds as long as your players are aware of it, that they're stepping into it, okay? I mean, I run World of Greyhawk campaigns. I run it as traditional as possible. There's a lot of races that exist in 5th edition that we do not use because they didn't exist in the world. People call me racist because I don't allow Warforged to be in Greyhawk. You're a racist. Okay, I'm sorry. Warforged technically are only part of Eberron, and according to Eberron's lore, nothing enters or leaves Eberron's cosmos. It's completely locked off, so I'm following the lore of your book. So don't call me racist because I'm following the rules as written. But at the same time, expect it, okay? You're going to get called some stuff as a dungeon master that you didn't realize that you were doing because you didn't plan for it. You didn't speak about it on the front side. So again, continuing along here, real world religion. versus polytheism of D&D, or I guess we'd say agnosticism of 5th edition D&D. Are you using a lot of gods in your world? Is it there is only one god and he is great in your world? You got to be upfront with your players on this kind of stuff. You'd be surprised how many people get sensitive when you start talking gods and religions in a fantasy game. Social and cultural notes, if there's anything that your players need to add that wasn't on the list, they get the gap. Mental, physical health. Cancer, claustrophobia, gaslighting, genocide, paralysis, physical restraint, self-harm, sexual assault, terrorism, and torture. Most of these are themes in adventures. But if your players are not, I mean, obviously you're not going to, hopefully you're not describing sexual assault, but that's been a plot point in the past for vengeance, rescue, whatever. If that's something that your players are concerned about, learn how to run that plot without the sexual assault. Torture. I mean, if you're dealing with dark elves, they torture for shits and grins. That's part of their lifestyle. That's racist for me to say that, even though it's been codified in 25 years of writing. Point being, if there's going to be depictions of any of these in your campaign, make sure that you're being upfront with your party. Make sure that you tell them, even if you're not planning on using it right now, knowing how they feel about it for future preparation is good to have on as well. So we're just looking at the campaign and safety and consent checklist that was shared off of what site am I on? I'm sorry. The Sly Flourish site gives you a link over to it. It's a good tool to have. Mental, physical, paralysis, physical restraint, cancer, gaslighting, genocide. Hell, my party talks about how I guess it's time to do genocide today. Oh, you killed 11 dudes. That's not a genocide. But obviously that party's okay with the idea and the term of it. So, things that you can put out up front early on to make sure that your party feels, where they're at about it. Now, I am going to tell you one thing. Don't do this and don't have a form like this or a question and answer in front of each other, okay? If you're going to use a campaign safety and consent checklist, talk about it with your party, your players, and then have them individually send it to you, because you'd be surprised peer pressure. We all, dude, at the end of the day, you got to remember, we're dealing with people. Even though we're playing fantasy games, even though players are pretending to be someone else, we can't avoid the fact that we're still dealing with human beings and the good and the bad that goes along with it. In some instances, the idea of going into a fantasy universe to roleplay can amplify the absolute best and the absolute worst about a person's personality, about a player's personality. Some people see going into a fantasy universe as a blank check to be as much of a heinous bastard as they want to. And if there's space in your campaign for that, that's fine. That's the stuff that we're talking about in session 0. I kind of talked about that prior. Putting a murder hobo in with a drama kid. You're bound to have conflicts between the players. You're bound to have frustrated players, as neither of them feels that their preference, the preferential style, is important. Both of them will constantly feel like they are a spectator to the other person's actions. And ultimately, both people will end up accusing you, the dungeon master, of favoring one style or the other. This is going to sound cold-hearted, but you have to remember, every player that's coming to your table is coming with a selfish desire to have fun. Most players understand and acknowledge that fun is going to be interacting with others and including others in that fun. Some of your players, human nature being what it is, only care about themselves. They will not give a thought to what's going to happen after they do what they're going to do. What's in front of them, what's in their brain right now is the coolest fucking idea ever, and I can't wait to do it. And I'm going to do it because it sounds fun, and I don't care about what happens to the rest of the group. You're going to have those players as part of your table. Eventually, if you play with enough people, you're going to end up with that. So that's what the session 0 is for, finding those people, finding out where they are, and finding out how they're going to interact with the rest of the people. And you're going to have the opposite. You're going to have the Mary Sue, the nurse, lack of a better term, I apologize. The team mom or the team dad. You shouldn't do that. That's not right. You shouldn't do that. The one that's always going to sit there and pass judgment on everyone else's. They're not going to tell you what you should do, but they're always going to tell you what you shouldn't have done or you shouldn't do. Dude, that's as disruptive to your group as the person that's a strong personality that has to lead everything. You know, always making someone second guess themselves, always making someone unsure, always ruining someone's confidence. What, you shouldn't have done that. I don't think you should do that. So, you know, it's not always about the bombastic personality who wants to dominate. Sometimes it's the reserved, judgmental person who doesn't do anything but say, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that. That was dumb." You know, Session zero is where you're finding the cracks, where you're finding the flaws. As much as you're establishing everything else and you're giving your players opportunities to interact with each other, as much as you're giving them information to build your world, you're also using this time period to determine how the players act and react, and how they act and react with each other. It's a big task. It's a big, big, big ask for one session. And honestly, you're not going to be able to solve the world's problems in your session zero. You're trying to establish the starting point and a consistent set of rules, expectations, and limits for your group as you move forward. That's it. You're giving everyone the initial chance to interact with each other. You're giving yourself this snap point of view to see how people act. And it's important to do in session zero because when we're in game, number one, we have a rhythm that we're trying to pace because we're now playing a game. We are here, we're rolling our dice, we're having fun, we're doing this. We don't want to break out and have to go dig into the rule book every 20 minutes. And we don't have to want to stop our first session and say, wait a minute, that's not right. Well, you never said that wasn't right. You never said there was limits on what I could or couldn't do. Blah blah blah. I wanna kill the blacksmith and put his head on a pike and tie it to my backpack and gross out the rest of my team. Ew, that's gross. That's disgusting. If you never had the conversation to begin with, you can't get mad at Murder Hobo for wanting to do that. That was the establishment of it. So don't sell yourself short in your session zero. The campaign safety checklist is a big part of the fourth section. So yeah. That's good. We ended up talking the last 20 minutes or so about that, and I guess that's not a bad thing. So I'm going to go ahead and finish it up here in the next couple of minutes. But in review, your session zero. Before you start your session zero, Dungeon Masters, before you start session zero, make sure that you are comfortable with the rules. You at least know where to look everything up. You're quick and confident with turn order, action economy, all of that. You have an idea and you have an adventure ready. You're ready to go. You're going to play this book. You're going to play this module. You're going to play this homebrew. And that's what you present to your party. You're presenting the rules to them. We are playing rule as written with the following homebrew adjustments. Let's discuss. Give your party, the players, the opportunity to ask questions. What about this? What about that? That would be cool. That wouldn't be cool. Make sure you have a notebook with you, a spreadsheet, something, so you can make notes of all of this stuff as you're having the conversation. So from there, the second thing is presenting the adventure. Okay, now that we're happy with the rules, now that we know what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, this is what we're going to play. Have your discussion on that. Doesn't need as much player input, but pay attention to the player feedback. Very rarely does a DM say, okay, let's play. What do we want to play? Because and you can do that if you want, but day one, early on, no. Be prepared with what you're going to play. Be prepared to present what you're going to play to your party. Third part is logistics. Where are we at? What are we doing? Whose house are we playing at? What software are we using? What books are we using? What character books are we going to source our characters from? Can we use every option available? Well, I don't have Tasha's. So okay, if no one else can use Tasha's then because half our party doesn't. That's where that discussion is going to be taking place as well in the third part, the logistics as well as the rules section. Who's bringing food? Do we bring food? Do we eat? How long are we playing? Are you allowed to use phones at your table? All of the stuff with the logistics happen there. And then the last part of your session zero is the player interaction. Setting your safety checklist, setting your consent checklist, giving them icebreakers. Play with your party. I would suggest at least an hour, if not more. As much time as you can dedicate to this section of your session zero. The more time you listen to your players interact with each other, and the more times you listen to them verbally fence about consent checklists and things like that, the better feel you're going to get for your party's directions and your players' direction. The better feel you're going to get for the personality types involved in your game. The less talking you do in this section, the more you're going to be able to do. Remember, I said active listening. You're listening, you're providing feedback based on the direction of their question. You're providing answers as you're asked, but you're not trying to guide them into an answer with your response. You're trying to guide them into being honest and upfront with you and each other, okay? Um, when you do your consent checklist, when you do your safety checklist, do not have the people do it in front of each other. That peer pressure is a real thing. If everyone's like, oh, I don't care about spiders. I don't care about any of that. I don't care about any of that. I don't care. Oh, I really fucking hate spiders, but they're going to laugh at me. Sure, why not? So you had one person put themselves in an uncomfortable position already because of the peer pressure of the group. So your campaign safety checklist, consent checklist should be done by your players in private and given to you in private. Whether you're sending it out prior to your session 0, which is a good idea, or you want to send it out during your conversation, have them send it back to you at the end of it. Actually, that's not the best thing. Make sure one way or another that you are establishing your baseline safety expectations, your hard and soft limits, your pauses. Make sure all of that has been established before you end your session 0. Make sure everyone's on the same page with it. Make sure there's no question, no understanding. Even if you have to take a little bit of time away from your adventure part of it, even if you're going to end up changing your adventure because of the safety checklist, be prepared to do that. Okay. Now this is a little bit more. Graybeard sitting here saying this is a little bit more of a modern approach to setting up a game than I'm used to, but I appreciate it and I respect the process. Even if I don't necessarily agree with every single thing on here, there is a chance that I have a player that does. The last thing I want to do is make them uncomfortable because I feel really strongly about something. Okay. Again, you are the dungeon master. You're the creator of worlds and multiverses. If you can't tweak slavery out of existence, you're in the wrong chair. You know. But at the same time, if I tell my party we are playing Scourge of the Slave Lords, the next 10 levels we will be on the Pomars fighting against orcs, hobgoblins, goblins, gnolls, kobolds, and all of that have been taking slaves along the Woolly Bay, and we're freeing the slaves and we're fighting against the slave lords. I've used the word slave 9 times in that statement. If anyone's got a problem with slavery, they got to let me know right off the gate because that's part of that campaign. So if I'm sitting there, I'm planning on running this campaign, I've got 5 players, and 4 of the players said that's badass, and 1 player said no. You have an obligation at that point to decide for yourself, your plan of your campaign, and the preference of your group to throw it all away to suit the 1 player or to let that 1 player know this is what we're playing. I'm sorry if this feels a little uncomfortable for you. This may not be the campaign for you. We'll give you a holler on the next run. When we finish this one up, I'll give you a holler. Maybe we can start the next one. You have that option. Don't, I've been really hammering home the need to placate your players. And I agree with that 90% of the way. But at the end of the day, it's still a group of friends playing a game. So if you have your heart set on this, and most of your group has your heart set on playing this adventure, and 1 person in the group says, I don't want to do that because of X, that's a difficult decision. That's a tough call. That's something that you and your group will have to make a choice of on your own. But that's the joy of having a session 0. Maybe everyone sits down and chats it back out and says, well, I really like the idea of this adventure, but I'm not tied to it. If it's going to make you feel uncomfortable, we can come up with another adventure. It's not a big deal. We can do a different campaign. No harm, no foul. If you have a good group with good, with mutual respect, founded in positive interactions, then every likelihood is that the party as a whole will decide not to run that adventure because it ooks out your 1 player. It's interesting, amazing how things work out like that. Upfront communication of what you're planning, what you're running, what the limits are, and incorporating your players' feedback into your plan are going to give you a happier table. And more importantly, when you do have that slip, or you do have that accident, or you do have that oops moment, it's no one's going to get bent out of shape over it because you've established up front and it was an error. It wasn't a standard. Okay. Campaign safety and consent checklist. It's a newer invention for 5th edition for Dungeons and Dragons. It's something I appreciate. I think, there's probably some things that are missing on it. There's probably some things that you'll look at that, you don't think of are issues as a dungeon master. Doesn't mean they might not be issues to your players. So yeah, be aware of that. Cancer. I was talking about Elder Evil Ragnora, basically this gigantic goddess of growth who infects the world like a gigantic tumor. The entire adventure arc is described as your world becoming cancerous with growth. If you've got someone in your group that's dealing with chemo, you may not want to use Ragnora. If you had someone that recently lost a parent, a friend, or a family member to cancer, you may want to avoid Ragnora, okay? And I know this is a very specific example, but this is a very specific example that could be hurtful to your players, that could be triggering to an individual. The idea of Ragnora as an elder evil is great, but the similarities and the parallels between her effects on the world and actual cancer can be problematic. Not out of malice, not out of plan, but that would be something that I'd have to take in consideration when I'm sitting down with my play group. So yeah, gaslighting, you know, we're laughing. Oh shit, I said I was gonna finish up a few minutes ago, and I really didn't. It's really easy to fall down a rabbit hole and talk about Dungeons and Dragons, but you know, gaslighting is another thing. Hell, I've got a group that actively gaslights another player, but they check in with each other as people outside of it to make sure, you know, we're just having fun, everything's cool, right? So that's an also important thing to important your players. Make sure that you're talking away from the table in addition at the table. But yeah, lots of stuff, man. We could go on for another 3 hours on session 0 and probably still end up missing 1 or 2 things. And for that, I do apologize. But yeah, for real this time, to sum it up, cover your rules. Make sure that you are upfront with the rules system that you're going to use. Make sure you're upfront with any changes, any homebrews that you're going to do those rules. And make sure you're consistent in those applications once everyone agrees. While you're doing your rules, make sure that you've educated how you're going to handle a rule difference. We're going to roll with what I say, and if I was wrong, we'll look it up later, and if I was wrong, we'll make a change. Or we can pause as soon as there's a rule problem so we can learn at the same time with an example. That's what's discussed in the rules section. Logistics, where are we playing, who are we playing, what software are we using, make sure everyone knows how to use the software, make sure everyone has access to your table, however that table is. Scheduling is handled in there. What adventure are we running? What's my adventure plan? We're doing Lost Mines, we're doing Tomb of Annihilation, we're doing Jim Bob's Homebrew World of Ice and Snow. Doesn't matter what, but this is where you present that to the party. Caveat on this is be ready to change this after the 4th section. 4th section, player interaction, checklists, safety checklists. What would you do? Icebreakers, things like that. This is where you are prompting your players to interact with each other. This is where you're fishing for any questions about problematic content. This is where you're pushing for them to say what they like, say what they don't like. This is where you're listening to see if there's potential problems between your players, if there's going to be some personality issues that will forefront. Do you have the loudmouth who's going to say something about everyone's decision? Do you have the one person that never says anything and you've got to drag an answer out of them? That's, you know, this is the initial phases of determining your players' personalities and how well or poorly that they will interact with each other. So again, I say number 4, the player interaction is the biggest part of your session 0. But in reality, none of it works without any other. Something that happens during the player interaction phase can change your adventure ran, for example. All of that. So all of the factors flow together, but all of them need to be addressed, and you definitely need to make sure that you take notes, excuse me, and possibly codify all of this stuff during your session 0. You invest in your session 0, I promise you your main game sessions from that point forward will go smooth. You're investing in your session 0, you're investing in your people. You're taking their input and building the game forward and going forward. You're building that mutual line of respect. You're establishing the expectation for communication, not just at session 0, but moving forward. Important to make sure that your people understand that you can come to me anytime after this and say what you need to as well. This is a fluid flowing game. Things are going to change. Players are going to, your character should grow and change as the campaign goes. So there might be the need to revisit some of the stuff that you're talking about in session 0. So always leave it open as well. Even though we're codifying everything, don't say, well, you know what, you didn't bring it up in session 0, too bad, so sad, you got to suffer with it. No. Make sure that you're giving yourselves and your players some flexibility. But hey, DMGeezerjim here. I know that's been a whole heck of a lot. Session 0 is a big thing. I hope you've enjoyed this series so far. I know some of it's a lot of stuff going into dungeon mastering. I'm trying to break it apart bit by bit, piece by piece. Not everything's going to apply to everybody, but I'm at the same time, I'm sure there are certain people that need to hear some of this stuff, where to look for this, that, and the other. So we're going to continue on and keep on trucking along and talk about stuff. I think next thing we'll talk about is I don't know. We'll surprise you. Check the title on my next episode. But yeah, we are closing out the session 0. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this, share the video with some other people. Like, follow, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you want to join me for live chats, I'm over on Twitch. All of the bios you can find that in the same channel. But above all else, man, thank you for sharing your time with me. I wish you the best of luck as you step into your dungeon mastering. As always, feel free to leave comments if there's something that you want to hear more about, or if there's something that you don't even agree with, man. We've got comments are sitting down on the bottom. Feel free to drop in and let me know. But yeah, we're going to close out. You guys have a great weekend and good luck with your sessions. And until next time, be safe. Thank you for your time.